I can start off. So, as you know, my name is Madeline Antony, and I am a member of Elect Her, but I also do go to UVic. I'm in my fourth year now, and I'm taking biology, so a little bit different, but I ended up in Elect Her just through friends, and then sort of grew my interest from there. And I am originally from Calgary, but I'm out on the island for school, and so definitely appreciate being out here. It's definitely a beautiful place. But yeah, that's sort of my background. And then I'll just do a quick territorial acknowledgement just because that's how we're starting off all of our chats. So I would just like to acknowledge with respect that we live upon the Songhees, Esquimalt, and Wasanic people's territory, and that their vital relationships with the land continue to this day. And then just quickly about Elect Her. We're a student-run club that aims to encourage young women and other marginalized genders to get into the world of politics and the worlds, or just roles of leadership in general. And we kind of do that through workshops, sharing the stories of people like you that are already in that world, and trying to just build up the confidence of all of those people to get the next generation in those roles. And so that's kind of us. And so I really appreciate that you took the time to speak with us and that you're here. And Astra speaks very highly of you, so I'm glad to have you on the call. And so, yeah, if you just don't mind giving us a little intro on who you are, and we'll get going.
Of course. Well, first of all, it's really nice to meet you, Madeline. And yeah, I'm really pleased. I hope I can offer some pearls of wisdom, but if there's, if it's a journey, so if there's any questions you have that you think the people that will be watching would be interested in, please don't hesitate to ask. I'm just happy to participate. And yeah, my name is Chantelle Krish. Someone's vacuuming outside. Can you hear that? Is that?
It's just like a background sound, so it's okay.
Is
it? It's like white noise.
Sorry. Gosh. Normally I don't have so many tech issues, but anyway, so my name is Chantelle Krish. I live in North Vancouver. I just moved here actually from Victoria. I work for the Honorable Janet Austin, who's the 30th Lieutenant Governor of British Columbia. And I am Director of Communications, Programs, and Outreach at the Office of the Lieutenant Governor. And so what that really means is I help to coordinate. My team is responsible for running a number of events, which in times of COVID looks a little bit different, but we're doing a lot of things like this, which is wonderful. It's great to see the flexibility and adaptability of people to really still want to connect, and for us to be able to be fortunate to have technologies that help us do that. But I'm also responsible for telling the story of the BLG, the Lieutenant Governor, and the themes that are really important to her, which are reconciliation, democracy, and equality and inclusion. And the last one is something that's really near, and they're all important to me as well, but I used to work before working in this role for the YWCA Metro Vancouver, where I actually knew Her Honor, as she was CEO there, and I was Director of Advocacy and Communications. And so for me, doing work that strives to achieve gender equality and identifies gaps for women and girls and gender diverse folks to be able to contribute and to be able to lead meaningful lives where they have equal opportunities, that to me is sort of what gets me going and what is I'm most passionate about. And I've seen that kind of work be effective, but I've also seen how much need there is to focus on that and for us all to play a role in advancing equality in its many forms. So that's what I'm passionate about. I have a communications degree from the University of Ottawa and a master's degree in community development and public administration from UVic, actually, which is, I love that university. It's great. So I love that this is helping to contribute to a conversation that's rooted there. And yeah, I'm on a couple of boards. One of them is the Minerva Foundation for BC Women, which is all about empowering young women and women later in their careers through their leadership journey. And it's rooted in sort of helping people to understand what the values are that they bring to their leadership journey. So that's just a little bit about me. I'll save the rest if there's any questions from you.
Yeah, what first sparked your interest in kind of doing all this community work and activism? And then how did that sort of translate into your job with the Lieutenant Governor?
That's a great question. What first sparked my interest in activism and social justice? I think it's been ingrained in me since I was born. Like my family background is Sri Lankan, and when I was very little, I used to go to Sri Lanka with my family and visit my grandparents and just see the country that my family's from and where my roots are as well. And my grandmother, I remember once waking up at her house and seeing this long lineup of people just like spilling out onto the street, and she was really involved in her church, and so her and some of her friends from church were handing out meals, and like I was 5 or 7 or something, too young to really understand poverty and oppression and systemic barriers to equality, but I saw this act of kindness, and also I saw this long lineup of people, and so the need, obviously, and Sri Lanka is a developing country, so obviously there's a lot of need. And so I asked her, like, what are you doing? Like, well, what is all of this? And I remember her saying, the world is just so much bigger than you and I, and we all have a duty. And so for me, that idea has stuck with me my whole life, and I really believe that we have a role to play in leaving this world better than when we came into it, and the duty can be something small, like volunteering for a community organization, or it could be, making it your life's work. So I tried hard to marry the two with my career and my passion for social justice, and that became, in the early days of my career, I started working in public relations in the corporate sector, and that was the first job I got out of my undergrad. And there wasn't a lot of opportunity to advance equality and to work on social justice. And you have to be okay with that when you're early in your career. And so I learned a lot of valuable skills around effective communication, and I found something that I was good at, which was at the time public relations. And then I had a great mentor, and he taught me a lot about sort of the importance of storytelling and how to engage with diverse audiences. And so eventually I started to weave that into I started to volunteer with organizations that were making an impact on women's lives. And the first one I think was Dress for Success, which is a great organization that just provides professional clothes to women as they enter into the workforce. And so I started to sort of look at volunteer opportunities and you try to see if there was ways to apply my skills that way. And then eventually over the course of a number of years, I was able to, I went to a lot of networking events, and I met the CEO, Janet Austin of the YWCA, and we just stayed in touch. And then eventually I saw an opening and I applied. And so it was, a lot of it was like building that network, but also being in spaces where decision makers were, where people leading organizations that I wanted to learn about were, and then making those connections. So that's kind of how, I would say, find something you're good at, build those skills, and then take time to add meaning to that maybe down the road, because if you try to do that straight out of university, it's possible, absolutely, and many people do it. But it can be challenging.
And how did you end up in communications?
That was sort of, it was kind of just one of those things where in high school, I didn't know what I wanted to do. There's there's like the science path, or my dad's an engineer. And so I was like, is that the area? But that was never something I was good at. So I saw this communications degree program at the University of Ottawa, and it was kind of new, and I was like, oh, that sounds good, and I'm good at communicating, so maybe I'll just take it. And then I learned, so it was kind of just luck and some interest, but then I started to learn about like how to tell a good story and why communication is so important and how the media functions and how it influences our social ideas and our norms in society. And then I started to build that understanding and say, okay, well, if that's how the media functions, we can influence what the media talks about, you know, and then we can influence greater public awareness and opinion on these key issues. So it was sort of like a, you know, and I had really good mentors along the way, like that first boss, Robert Simpson. He was just a former journalist, and he just taught me a lot about sort of that functioning of communications and media and that important role in business and just life. And so I found that I really enjoyed it, and it was something that I liked doing and that I was good at, and I learned some skills along the way, and that's sort of how it took me to where I am now.
Was there like a moment that you're like, yes, this is what I want to do, like this is the direction I want to go?
I remember, I mean, the first job, like the public relations agency I worked at, I certainly, you know, one of my earliest jobs or the earliest tasks was just like pitch stories to journalists. And it's intimidating. Like I was pitching stories about corporate clients, which, you know, I didn't really feel like I knew a lot about, but I had to learn about them quickly. And so I remember just having success with that, and a journalist being like, yeah, okay, I'll write a story for you. And it was in the Globe and Mail, and I was like, what? And so from there, I guess building some confidence, working with my boss to build some more skills, that was great. But the sweet spot of combining my skills and my passion really happened when I joined the YWCA, because there I had built a level of skills in communications that I was coming to that organization with what I felt had something to offer that could make a contribution. There was a gap in the organization in terms of their public relations and their public profile. So they needed someone to help them build that. So I felt like I was really enthusiastic to fill that gap. And then because the issues were so near and dear to me, and just issues affecting women everywhere, and we worked with marginalized communities, women leaving abusive relationships. We also worked on, you know, the gender pay gap and systemic barriers such as that to equality. So I learned a lot in that time, but all that learning was stuff that I felt like I already had a basic level of understanding as just being a woman. And so it just was easy. Like it was fun and it was easy, and it was wonderful to be able to work with some of our amazing clients to tell their stories, and then to see that kind of enthusiasm from the public come in, you know. And so I remember the first few years of working there in public relations, I built out sort of the public relations practice there at the organization. And then I started to become a spokesperson myself. So I was in the media a lot more. And so that was also really fun and interesting, because you get to, you know, be a voice for an organization that you're really passionate about. So those years, I spent 8 years at the Y, and those years were really formative in my skills building and my leadership development. And I also saw how the organization itself just really empowered women who worked there to thrive. And so that was also something that I was really proud to be a part of.
Well, and being on the forefront of so many different social issues throughout your career and then now, what would be advice that you'd give to someone who wants to get more involved and start to take action?
I mean, I would say kind of what you're doing, you know, with the Elect Her program or club at your school. Just put yourself out there, identify the issues that you're passionate about, because not everyone's passionate about the same stuff, right? So like I was talking to my sister recently, and she's really interested in sort of social enterprise and supporting children and programs that support children to thrive throughout their academic lives that might not have those opportunities. So she started volunteering and then joined a board of an organization in Toronto called Dare Arts, which uses arts and culture to help children from marginalized communities sort of achieve their full potential, because she's an artist herself, right? So she has that connection, but she's also a mother, and she also cares about the greater good. So for me, gender equality, human rights, those have always been important issues for me. And so I think it's just figuring out what those are. I mean, we're touched by so many things, like climate change is a huge piece. And I know for especially, you know, your generation, but even mine too, it's like we all need to learn way more about this. But So what are the things that you might be able to do to get you there? And then looking up organizations and initiatives and just joining them, or even just sending an email or having a call for more information and making those connections. You never know where these connections will lead you down the road. And so I think it's just building your network with like-minded individuals that are doing important work, and then finding a way to get involved if that's what suits you.
And then for a young woman or person of a marginalized gender who does want to go down sort of like the politics or leadership side of things, but kind of struggles to see themselves in that role, what kind of advice would you give for them?
Absolutely. First of all, I would empathize with them. I think it's getting better for sure, but it's tough. It's tough out there. It's hard when we have so much political discourse that's combative and not constructive. So I would say that I really admire young women and women of color and just women in general that put their hat in the ring, because it's a tough decision to make. Having said that, if you're not represented at the table where decisions are being made, real systemic change, like change in policy, change in laws, change in equal access to opportunities, it's just a much slower process if it even happens, right? So what I would suggest is, if you are interested, talk to people who you admire, who might be in a role like that or have held a position like that. And I can give a personal example. A few years, maybe 2 years ago, I was approached to run for a city council position here in Vancouver during the last election, and it was not from the main party. And anyway, I was approached. I'd never thought about the possibility of getting into politics. Like, I've always sort of been on the other side of it. But I thought, okay, I respect this person, I respect what he stands for, and so I'll take the time. I'll do my due diligence and I'll ask some questions. And so there was this woman who was a city councillor here for a long time, and she's incredibly admirable. And I reached out, and like, I knew her just at arm's length, you know, like, it wasn't like we were not friends by any means, but she's a busy person. Like, she's a city councillor. Anyway, I just sent her an email and I was like, hey, you know, you might remember me or not, and if you have time. And she responded within the week, and we had a coffee. And like, I was so impressed that she was willing to take the time to do that. And it reaffirmed that, like, these are all human beings, and women want to see other women succeed and thrive, and men want to see women succeed and thrive too. So to, you know, overcome that fear, reach out, be bold, and ask for that advice. And she, like, the reason I wanted to meet with her, because I wanted to understand the process. At the time I was pregnant, so it was also like, you know, it's even something I can,
yeah.
She talked me through everything from like the campaigning cycle to the life in politics to, you know, and answered all of the questions in a really candid and honest way. And so it helped me to make a much more informed decision. And at that time, I decided it wasn't the right fit. Part of that had to do with the party politics that had approached me, and that was that's a huge piece, right? Like, you need to make sure that your values align with what they stand for. But the other part was that the timing wasn't right. You know, I was not ready to campaign, and also I don't even know if that's what I want to be doing. So it helped to talk to her. It also helped to build my confidence to approach people like that down the road and say, hey, this is something I'm interested in, right? And so I think that the very act of just reaching out and making those connections is really valuable, and recognizing that, like, senior leaders such as this woman that I'm describing, you know, they'll see you all as major, like a huge value for our society, for civil society, for politics. So they will take the time to make those connections. And it might not be the first person that you call, but you know, you bring so much value to the table. And I think that's making sure that you understand that and know that, you know, you're really important to the functioning of this society. And so people deserve to give you that attention to answer those questions.
Yeah, I know. Every time I send out one of the emails to reach out to a speaker for this, and someone replies, I'm like, oh my gosh.
I know.
I was like, they read it.
It's a nice feeling, for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely, every time someone answers it, you can almost feel that like state of confidence that comes up to be like,
Yeah, and that like that in itself speaks for just like having a community of support. Like what you're doing with this program is so important. And like having more women and gender diverse people interested and overcome the many hurdles to get into politics in itself is a really brave act. So to be able to do that and say, yeah, I'm going to help you get to where you want to be, or at least answer some of those questions for you to make an informed decision, 9 times out of 10 people will say yes because they care about that greater good, right? So I think that that's an important piece to remember.
yeah, and it is hard to remember some of them. Just, they're all just people, and they all had to
Yeah.
go through this.
I know.
Like, it's a process that
know.
everybody had to go through, which is definitely something that I struggle to keep in mind. But what would you say is sort of like the biggest obstacle that you had to go past to get to where you are?
I don't know if there's like one thing.
Right.
I would say early days, it's probably confidence. Like it's probably the confidence to pick up the phone and make those connections and make those calls, or to introduce yourself to someone at an event and say, here's who I am and what I'm interested in. I would say down the road, I faced like when I transitioned from corporate to nonprofit, before I made that transition, I felt this disconnect between sort of like my head and my heart and the kind of work that I wanted to be doing. And yes, I was volunteering and that was meaningful and adding a lot of meaning to my life, but it didn't feel like enough. So I remember struggling with that. And so I made an active effort to figure out what are the organizations out there that are doing work that I'd like to be aligned with, but also just putting myself out there. So that's tough. But I still did that and did events and networking and all that kind of stuff. These days, I would say, and this might not be as much of an issue for the students, it might be, but it's really like reconciling having a kid with having a very high pressure job, and I like when I worked at the Y, that was one of the main issues we advocated for, was helping women and mothers to have balance in their lives by advocating for things like access to affordable childcare, parental leave, or more equal distribution of unpaid work at home, because women often take on the brunt of that, and so as a result, it just leaves less room, right? So having a partner, if you decide the path that in your life is to share your life with someone or you meet someone, making sure that that person has the same values as you in terms of equality. And equality starts in the home. Like it's not just what's out there and rights and laws, although that is incredibly important and a huge part of it, but it's also at home, and so I'm fortunate to have a partner, and him and I are really supportive of each other, and we have busy careers, and now we're expecting another one, so it's like things are just kind of really ramping up that way. So just checking in and making sure that balance in our relationship is truly reflected in everything we do, whether it's like silly chores around the house to like our career development and our career growth. And so that's a big part of it. And that's kind of a lifelong thing, I would say. Yeah. But I would say, the other piece that's helped me sort of as a, maybe preempting another question, is having mentors that you can really like rely on for advice. And they don't have to be in an official context, but they can be. There's great programs out there for young women, and I'd be happy to share some of those with the group. But just having people that have inspired you and have supported you in your development and in your careers, and being able to call them and say, hey, I have this opportunity, I'm not sure if I should take it, here's what I'm thinking. Like that city council that I talked about, now we're friends, like now we're in touch. Now we talk regularly. And I remember when I was leaving to go on my maternity leave, like she took me out for lunch, and she was just so supportive and was like, if there's anything you need, even just like as a mother, you know, let
Right.
me know, kind of thing. And so having people that can really, you can call on when you're in these transitional times in your life and say, I need advice and guidance. Most people love doing that because it adds a lot of value. Like I've mentored some amazing young people, and for me, I think I get more out of it than they do, you know. So I would say that that's been super helpful for me.
And well, first, congrats.
Yeah.
But just bringing it back to the how women take on some of these roles. What would you say the effect of the pandemic is going to be sort of on women now and sort of like in the future as well?
Yeah, it's a great question. The pandemic has really shown that equality has not been achieved. I mean, we know that anyway, but it's showing up in so many areas. It's showing up in the home, like it's showing up in care for children, you know, all the challenges that I think a lot of mothers were dealing with, but being able to somehow juggle. It's like if you don't have support, forget about it, you know, like that. You're seeing women leave the workforce right now because of that, and because they just, you know, if you have to choose between taking care of your children and making sure they have a proper education and food on the table or working, what are you going to do, you know? Like, so it's, I think women are forced to make harder choices that impact their own economic security and their own independence, because one, that's how our society is structured. You know, there's a gender pay gap, so typically women are making less money than men. So if you're in a heteronormative relationship, let's say, and you are, you know, part of that like nuclear family, which I acknowledge is not the common, you know, it's not necessarily an experience for everyone. But let's say you are, if you look at, okay, well, mom's making less money than dad, so if anyone's going to remove themselves from the workforce, even if it's down to part-time or even if it's temporarily, it's going to be mom, because that's like better for the economic security of the home. What that doesn't take into account, it's not equitable, you know, like if you have to take yourself out of the workforce, I think the thing is, like, if you're out of the workforce for 3 years, it requires retraining, reskills, upgrade, like re-education. And that's just on paper, and that's just learning. That's not the confidence, that's not the connections that you've lost, you know, the contributions to your pension, all of that stuff. So like it puts women at a much greater disadvantage financially, when they do have to, and that happens already when you take maternity leave, right? So it's like there's a lot of things like that are happening, and then for your generation, for young people, the mental health challenges just alone, I can only imagine how intense they are, right? And the increases in stress and anxiety and with what you're going to do with your life during this time. So making sure that there's supports for young women and gender diverse people to be able to connect with and to do meaningful work in a remote virtual way. They have to be accessible, they have to be broad, and they have to really target people that are typically, you know, marginalized, and that's women and girls. We've seen increases in rates of violence against women because people who are already experiencing abuse, whether it's physical, emotional, or financial, are now stuck. Like they're financially stuck, and they're also stuck in their homes, and there's a lot of unhappiness and anxiety brooding, and that results in increases in violence. So the solution to that is making sure that we continue to build understanding and public and financial support for programs that help women and people that are marginalized so that they can have equal access to choices. But I think, you know, the final piece is just talking about it, making sure that that issue is top of mind, and supporting organizations that do that work. And I'm impressed with what I'm seeing in terms of like government funding, but even just nonprofit type support for women and girls, and just that this issue is top of discussion, or it's out there, you know, and it's, we're hearing the need for a feminist economic recovery, like those, that kind of language, and the documentation and evidence to back that up. So to me, that's promising. And I think we just have to keep that momentum going.
Yeah, I feel like that's the biggest thing, like keeping it up
Yeah.
when we return to normal, if it happens. But
yeah, and like that's hard work, and that really brings it back full circle to the work you're doing. Like if you have people in politics, people in decision making positions, people in leadership that truly understand or sympathize or know the importance of these topics and can advocate for them at these higher levels, that's how you keep that momentum going, for sure. Or that's one way.
one sort of the list of areas that do need work, how do you stop yourself from getting overwhelmed by just like the vast amount of work that still needs to be done?
I mean, that's hard. Like I think I know when I first started getting it, like when I first started at the Y and I started working in social justice like really deeply, and personally I started to, because the Y had frontline services in the downtown east side, but also all over Metro Vancouver. So and because of the role I was in, I was meeting with women with lived experience and hearing their stories. And before I'd read about it, I had some experience with that, but it wasn't so full on. And so to actually it was tough. It was tough to actually hear a lot of the experiences that they were going through and try to look past it at the solutions, and it took a bit of, me talking to colleagues that have worked for the organization for a long time and asking them for advice again, like how do you find the inspiration to get up every day and really understand you're making a change. And so I learned a lot during that time about resilience, and these women were incredibly resilient, and I learned a lot about empowerment, and words like that, and concepts that, if we empower people through giving them opportunities and skills, then they can fully achieve the things that they deserve and that they want out of their own life. And so I started to really try and embody those values in my own self, but trying to understand how those concepts could be applied. And so the idea of empowerment, which is essentially, building skills, confidence, self-efficacy among people so that they see themselves as part of the solution and as part of the change. That ended up being the topic of my master's thesis, which was empowering young people to become advocates for gender equality. And so I learned a lot about, what you need to do to get there. And no surprise, one of them is give young people opportunities to make a difference and let them lead those opportunities. Don't just tell them what to do, but actually let them come up with the ideas and just help them out where they might need it. And so youth empowerment had become something that I started to get much more involved in. I started as a youth, I'm not anymore, and so that's actually how I met, Astra, and I started up a youth council at the Y, and then we started one up with the LG's office, and so listening to the ideas and seeing that kind of enthusiasm and positive attitude of young folks, and also listening to their experiences and trying to help them navigate when they asked for it, that to me has been a real wonderful silver lining of this kind of work, is that there's no shortage of resilience and there's no shortage of self-determination. And so it's just finding ways to bring that to the forefront and to leverage those opportunities, but also to listen.
And sort of across the board, your sort of investment in your values has kind of come up. And I know we've kind of addressed it overall, but what would you say are your values, and how have you sort of ensured that your work reflects those?
Yeah, I mean, I would say one of my major values is collaboration, is working with lots of different kinds of people. I've been fortunate to work in all sectors, private, nonprofit, and public, being now in government. And one thing that is very clear is that you're not going to make real change if you're always talking to the same people. You really have to involve folks from all of the sectors, but also beyond that, from different walks of life, and having something like a youth advisory council at the LG's office has been really great, because the whole point is there's young people from across the province helping to inform us on strategies to engage with their demographic, but also on how these issues of equality and inclusion or democracy or reconciliation are experienced by them. So for me, collaborating with people like-minded, but maybe not so like-minded, and really listening to what they have to say, and then trying to build an informed opinion so that the approach to my work isn't so like tunneled, you know, that's really important. The other value that I have is, I mean, I would say curiosity. Like, I'm a very curious person, and I like to, and that's led me to a life so far of continual learning, you know, like, so always staying informed and making sure that you're getting your information from credible, reliable sources. Super important. And then, and just building an informed opinion. Like, it's easy when you work in social justice to say, like, it's this way or no way, you know. And something I learned early on from Janet Austin, who's been an amazing mentor of mine and is now lieutenant governor, was that sometimes that purist approach to work, like it's this way or no way, it doesn't lead to the solutions that are possible, you know? So like, what I mean by that is, like, if you are advocating for something and it's, you know, the people that are making the decisions might come back and say, well, we can't give you the whole thing, but we can give you this piece of it. Sometimes that's the best you can do at the time. And there's a lot of factors that influence that. It's politics, it's money, it's public opinion, it's capacity. So you have to take that and be appreciative of it and celebrate the small successes. And I think a great way to do that is getting informed on the broad range of issues, you know, and understanding sort of the intersectionality of a lot of the type of social justice topics. So that's another one. The other one, and like, I've led teams and I love doing that. I love empowering people to thrive in their roles. That keeps me going for sure. But a big part of that is transparency, is like, if you run a team and they don't know why you're making the decisions you're making, it's not an empowering approach to leadership, right? And that doesn't mean like they need every line by line budget item on, like, but you know, the brass tacks of like, okay, we're not gonna be able to do this because we just don't have the budget for it, but why don't we find a way to try and get somewhere closer to where we want to be? And doing that in a way where you give them as much information as you can, it's super important. So I've had leaders that have done that with me and I really appreciate it.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean,
yeah.
Yeah, lots of, I know I had to bring my feeling to the table too. And I'm definitely doing very minimal talking and putting all the weight on you. So,
okay.
And so mentioning just like an intersectional lens, how have you applied like an intersectional lens to your work, and or on a bigger scale, sort of like the lieutenant governor's role? You can go either route.
Yeah, that's like, yeah, absolutely an important question. Do you mind if I just grab a quick sip of water?
Oh, so yeah, sorry. Of course. No, it's fine.
I'll just mute. My big baby belly. Okay. Yeah, intersectionality, super important. I would say, like, for me, that goes back to really understanding the whole story, you know. So, and understanding that there are so many different things that influence the opportunities that a person can get. You know, you could, like, I was privileged to have 2 parents. Like, that in itself is, you know, not everyone gets that experience, and or some people have it and it might put them at a disadvantage depending on their upbringing. I was fortunate to receive financial support to get an education. Like, all of those pieces, I am a person of color, I'm a woman, like, technically those things put me at a disadvantage, and I'm sure they have. So it's also recognizing that piece. And so when you go into an environment where people might not have that understanding, or you work in a bureaucracy like the government is a good example, where they're really trying to build that, but there's thousands of employees and there's age-old structures in place that are really rooted in kind of those colonial approaches to running the world, so like when I took a job with the lieutenant governor, I thought long and hard, is this a place where I can have most an impact? Because it's a very old structure and system. So then I looked at, well, who is the lieutenant governor? And she's someone that I've worked with for a long time. I know what she embodies. I know what she's trying to do. And sometimes to change these types of systems, you need to disrupt them from the inside out. You need to have people in there and have ideas floating around that challenge the status quo. And that's a really important part of advancing change. And if you have the right people in place to help you do that, which you might not know going in, so it's a risk, then you might be able to make that kind of work a success. And so to me, it's like the further I get in my career, the more important the people that I'm working with, that plays a big role in, and the culture and the environment. How do you treat your people? What are the values that you embody? And sometimes you can ask all those questions and you'll still never really know what it's like when you go in. And so, one piece of advice that I would have is, if it's not the right fit, and some people say you got to stay in a job for 2 years, like you don't want to have gaps on your resume, and I get all of that. But if it's not the right fit and something else comes along, or it just doesn't feel right and you want to start exploring something else, like you don't have to ascribe to those rules, because as someone that's hired a lot of people, it's more around like, who are you as a person and what do you bring to the table? And what are the skills that you have that can help us achieve our goals, and then fit is a really big part of it too. Like, can we go for coffee together? Can I see you walking down the halls and having a chat? Like, those are really important pieces. So I would say that it's that bigger picture of like, what are all the things that you bring, your life experience, your education, all of that, but also who you are as a person and what you stand for and what you believe in. And I think that to me is also an important part of intersectionality.
How do you think that like your unique lived experiences have allowed you to sort of bring new development into sort of like a bit of an older system?
Yeah, I would say, so I talked a little bit about early in my career finding something that I was good at, right? Which was public relations and communications. That doesn't mean I just started off good. I did a lot of work to like build those skills, but having confidence helps. Having successes and under your belt and being able to talk about them, campaigns that I've run or collaborations that I've forged, consensus that I've built among maybe unlikely allies, programs that I might have helped to start, and just being able to talk about them and describe them in ways that are clear and concise, that point to those success indicators, like how did this project actually come to be and what was the final outcome. So really it comes down to communication and being able to talk about the successes that you've had, talking about the challenges that you've had as well, but how you overcame them. And so, as people that are entering their careers or looking for opportunities, communication is a really, really important skill. It's probably the most important skill in your career. And it's something to be built over time. So learning about it, whether it's taking courses, whether it's like, I know lots of people that have done things like Toastmasters that are just absolutely horrified at public speaking. There's all these online courses you can do right now to become an effective communicator. Writing, listening, these are also communication skills. So learning how those skills come to be. And then like, if, I talked earlier about volunteering as a way to make an impact, but it's also a way to build your skills. So if I've had people volunteer with me that say, I really want to write for your blog, like that kind of stuff. So it helps to build their writing skills. We give them some support around editing. And then they have a published piece at the end of it. I mean, it might be on a blog, but still it's great. So just figuring out ways that you can build your skills in a way that also adds meaning to your life. I think that's super important.
And so that's actually essentially all of our questions. Our one last sort of tie-off one is, what do you think your next steps are for social justice work in your career?
I would say, that's a good question. I mean, I miss working in gender equality work. I certainly do. And I do get to do some of that with my work now and with my board and volunteer stuff. But I would say, you know, like during this pandemic, like many of you and like many people around the world, you really like, I just started to feel like, okay, what are the things that actually are really important to me? And how am I going to prioritize them in my life, and how am I going to make an impact and a contribution? So down the road, I would say, you know, whether it's continuing to advance it in the role that I'm in now, or looking eventually for opportunities that with organizations and folks that are doing work to really achieve sort of systems level change or support organizations that are doing that, that's something that I'd be really interested in. And again, that could be in a volunteer capacity, or it could be sort of in a more professional way, but that's something that, you know, one thing I've found is that when you do work that you love doing, it's a real privilege, and it doesn't feel like you're working every day, you know, and you're clocking in and clocking out, and it takes time to be able to get to do that, but that's certainly something that I'm going to continue to strive for.
Yeah, well, I hope that all of that comes to light in the future. And I really appreciate that you did come and take the time today to talk with us. You answered all of our questions beautifully, so much appreciated.
I hope I wasn't droning on.
No, that was great. I was listening, so I don't know if that's a good gauge of anything, but
of course. Yeah, and one thing I would say is, you know, if there's ever anyone in your networks or through this that is interested in learning more, whether from me or just being connected to like-minded folks or individuals or organizations that they might be interested in, I'd always be happy to connect. I think that was a common theme in our discussion, is making those connections, but I'm happy to just put myself out there if anyone wants to chat or be connected with someone that might add something to their life and their journey in leadership.
I mean, you might have just opened a can of worms for but I'm sure it'll be greatly appreciated. There's always lots of undergrads who are struggling to make those connections, especially now. I feel really bad for all the students who are in first or second year that haven't had the chance to build those connections in person, and now are kind of stuck in this virtual limbo of connections. So it's definitely nice to have that as a offer on the table. I'm sure it's greatly appreciated.
I know, absolutely. And I think there's a lot of interesting work it's Gender Equality Week right now, and so one of the things that I've been following online is just, you know, check out what's happening across the country and in our province, and opportunities to engage with young women in gender diverse communities, because there are a lot of organizations doing really meaningful work, and there's always someone that will be willing to pick up the phone and just chat a little bit more, dig a bit deeper into some of this important work, and find out how you might make an impact.
Yeah, looking for people for this series, the things that I've been able to find in the groups that I've been able to find that I didn't know existed before, I was very impressed and inspired by how much work is being done by so many great women and so many great individuals in general. It's nice to see, and it's very inspiring to see, even though there is so much left to do, there is a lot of people out there fighting the good fight. So. Yeah, which is great to know. Yeah, honestly. But yeah, I really do appreciate it. We're coming to the end of our Zoom window, so again, I'd like to say thank you, and I'll let you know when it goes up. But yeah, I really appreciate it, and I look forward to getting it all up and ready to go. And
thanks so much, Madeline, and good luck with your final year of school too.
Thank you. Yeah, for sure, and have a good rest of your day, whatever day of the week it is.
Take care.
You as well. Bye.